The grand chamber of the Galactic Council shimmered with ethereal light as representatives from thousands of civilizations gathered. Towering figures of crystalline beings, floating masses of energy, and insectoid diplomats lined the vast hall, their whispers merging into an unsettling hum. At the center, the Supreme Arbiter, an ancient being whose species had watched over the galaxy for eons, tapped a clawed finger against the marble-like podium. The chamber fell silent. Let the record state, the Arbiter's voice echoed, heavy with finality, that the entity known as the Voidborn Maw has entered the Sol system. As history dictates, no species has survived its arrival. We mourn the impending loss of humanity. A murmur swept through the chamber. Some members bowed their heads in ceremonial grief, while others barely concealed their indifference. The fate of Earth was already sealed. No species had ever fought off the Maw. Entire fleets had been consumed, planets reduced to nothing but drifting dust. The Maw was more than just an enemy. It was an inevitability. A reptilian delegate from the Selvar Dominion cleared his throat, his forked tongue flicking in distaste. The humans have sent a distress signal, requesting aid. A direct plea to this council. The Arbiter's many eyes blinked, unimpressed. And they do not ask to be evacuated. This caused a ripple of surprise among the delegates. Typically, when the Maw appeared in a system, the doomed species would beg for mercy, plead for evacuation, offer their entire worlds in servitude just for a chance to survive. Not Earth. Instead, the humans had sent only a single message. To the Galactic Council, we acknowledge your warning. We do not require rescue. We will not surrender. If the Maw comes for us, then let it learn the price of its hunger. The silence that followed was thick with disbelief. The Kelthari Empress, a towering feline-like being draped in flowing silks, let out a soft hiss of amusement, a predictable reaction. Humans have always been reckless. Their arrogance will lead to their extinction. A mechanical envoy from the Cephos Collective chimed in, its artificial voice devoid of emotion. Statistical projections suggest zero probability of human survival. It is illogical to resist. The Arbiter steepled his gnarled fingers. Then the matter is settled. The Council will take no further action. He tapped the podium once, sealing Earth's fate. But in the farthest corner of the chamber, one delegate remained still, his metallic fingers clenched. Admiral Calveros, the sole representative of the Ralvic Imperium, had spent time among the humans. He had seen their history, their defiance, their ability to turn desperation into victory. And as the Council dismissed Earth as already lost, a single thought crossed his mind. They don't know what humanity is capable of. The transmission from the Galactic Council played across every major broadcast on Earth. In government war rooms, military command centers, and civilian news feeds, the message was the same. Earth was already considered lost. But humanity had never been good at accepting defeat. In the underground command bunker of the United Terran Defense Network, world leaders, military strategists, and top scientists gathered around a massive holographic display. A red marker pulsed on the outer edge of the solar system, indicating the Maw's approach. The entity was already consuming everything in its path, growing stronger with each passing hour. President Elias Carter, his face lined with exhaustion, but his eyes burning with resolve, took a deep breath. We've all seen the Council's message. They've already buried us. So the question is simple. Do we prove them wrong? The response was immediate. The room erupted into action. There was no debate, no hesitation, no fear. Every nation, every military force, every scientific mind across the planet threw themselves into the singular goal of survival. Across the world, factories that once produced civilian goods were converted overnight into war production centers. Engineers worked around the clock, modifying satellites, constructing planetary defense grids, and resurrecting long-abandoned experimental weapons. The brightest minds of Earth, including those hidden in secret black site facilities, were given one command: find a way to kill the unkillable. In a research lab deep beneath the Arctic, Dr. Evelyn Sharp, Earth's leading quantum physicist, examined the latest scans of the Maw's composition. Conventional weapons won't work. It absorbs energy, disrupts matter, and exists partially outside known physics, she muttered. Then she froze. Her assistant, a young scientist named Raj Patel, noticed her expression. Dr. Sharp. She slowly turned to him, eyes wide with realization. We've been thinking of this thing as a creature, but what if we treated it as an unstable anomaly? If we can disrupt its quantum stability, we don't have to destroy it. We just have to make it collapse in on itself. Raj's eyes widened. You're saying we could force it to self-destruct? Sharp nodded. It's a long shot, but it's better than nothing. Halfway across the world, in a hidden military installation, General Tobias Wren stared at the latest intelligence reports. He knew Earth had weeks, maybe days. His voice was steady as he addressed his officers. We need volunteers for a mission with a near-zero survival rate. He let the weight of his words sink in. The Council thinks we'll go quietly. Let's prove them wrong. No one hesitated. From the ruins of once divided nations, a single, unbreakable force rose. Not to surrender, not to run, but to fight. And as the void-born Maw moved closer, something happened that had never occurred in the history of the galaxy. Humanity did not accept extinction. Humanity prepared for war. The void-born Maw entered the solar system with the force of 1,000 storms. As it crossed the boundary of Neptune's orbit, it consumed everything in its path. The moons of Uranus and Saturn disintegrated under its gravitational pull, shattering into jagged fragments of rock and dust. The Maw was an unstoppable force, ancient, vast, and powerful. Its mere presence bent space itself, warping the fabric of reality. From Earth's orbit, the sight was breathtaking and terrifying. The Maw appeared as a swirling mass of shadow, a gaping hole in the fabric of space. Its edges constantly churned, as though the very concept of matter was being devoured by the endless abyss. No one could calculate its size. Its true form was far too immense. Yet even from Earth's distant vantage point, the Maw seemed to be drawn toward the third planet, as though it had always known Earth's location. On Earth, the air was thick with tension. In military command centers around the world, the defense systems were ready, every weapon humanity had ever developed. And some that had only been theorized were now activated. Thousands of satellites were armed with railguns, ion cannons, and experimental energy weapons. In the final hours, governments had pooled all their resources to create a unified defense network that spanned the planet. It began with a wave of hypersonic missiles launched from Earth's surface. Each missile carried an explosive payload meant to breach the Maw's core, but as they reached its vicinity, something horrifying happened. The missiles twisted and contorted in mid-flight, their metal frames warping as if they were caught in a giant invisible hand. The Maw's gravitational field was already too powerful. "Missiles are being neutralized," shouted one of the officers at a Russian command center. "We need a backup plan. Now, deploy the railguns." General Tobias Wren's voice crackled over the comms. "Activate all orbital cannons. Now." In the cold void of space, enormous railguns mounted on orbital platforms opened fire. A barrage of high-velocity projectiles shot toward the Maw, each round traveling at nearly 10 times the speed of sound. The blasts hit their mark, but the Maw's swirling form absorbed them without flinching. It was as if the creature didn't even acknowledge the attack. Its surface shifted, and the energy simply disappeared. Humanity's first clash with the Maw was nothing short of devastating. The weapons they had spent years developing, the best minds in the world had ever created, were useless. And yet, they kept firing. Every failed attempt only fueled their anger and determination. The Maw did not destroy them with ease. It was forcing them to fight harder. Meanwhile, on Earth's surface, a collective sense of defiance rippled through the planet. No one was giving up. In the streets, civilians gathered around screens, watching the live feed of humanity's battle. The world's leaders, once reluctant to unite, now found common ground. People everywhere began to understand. The fate of Earth was not sealed. Not yet. Even as the Maw continued its advance, humanity refused to be swallowed up without a fight. Scientists scrambled for answers, military leaders strategized in real time, and civilians contributed to the effort in whatever ways they could, digging in, preparing for the inevitable while hoping for a miracle. In space, General Wren watched the Maw inch closer to Earth's orbit. He knew their current tactics weren't enough, but they had no choice but to keep fighting. The Maw would not consume Earth easily, not as long as humanity still had a breath to take. As the first round of attacks failed, one thing became undeniable. Humanity was not backing down. The war for Earth had only just begun. With the Maw advancing relentlessly, humanity's best minds gathered in secret, working furiously to devise a plan that could change the course of this seemingly hopeless war. Conventional weapons were useless against a creature of such unfathomable power. The railguns had failed. The missiles had failed. Even the energy-based weapons had been absorbed or deflected without so much as a tremor in the Maw's endless form. It was as if they were fighting an indestructible force of nature, one that bent the laws of physics to its will. But then, Dr. Evelyn Sharp, Earth's leading quantum physicist, made a discovery. The Maw wasn't just a creature. It was an anomaly in the fabric of space-time itself. Its very existence was disrupting the laws of the universe, existing outside conventional dimensions. It was an insatiable force, yes, but it was also unstable, a force of destruction that had not yet found its equilibrium. "It's not indestructible," Dr. Sharp muttered as she stared at the data streaming across her terminal. Her fingers danced across the keyboard, running simulations, adjusting parameters. "It's unstable. We can't kill it, but we can destabilize it, create a collapse. We need to hit it at the quantum level, force it to collapse in on itself." Her assistant, Raj Patel, looked at the calculations with wide eyes. "Are you saying we could destroy it? By making it unravel?" Sharp's face was grim, but resolute. "Exactly. The Maw draws its power from an unknown quantum singularity. If we can generate a quantum disruption strong enough to interfere with that singularity, we can destabilize it. The Maw will collapse, and its energy will implode." Raj shook his head in disbelief. "But how? The Maw is too large, too far. Our technology isn't capable of such a precise strike." "We'll have to get inside it," Sharp replied, her voice steady despite the enormity of the task. "We need to deploy a quantum disruption device directly into its core." The words hung in the air like a challenge no one dared speak aloud. It was madness, pure and simple. No one had ever even come close to approaching the Maw, let alone penetrating its vast, unknowable structure. Its gravitational pull alone would tear apart any ship foolish enough to get too close. But this wasn't a time for rational thinking. It was a time for desperation. Meanwhile, on Earth's surface, General Tobias Wren was making his own decisions. The military was already on high alert, preparing for the worst. "We need volunteers for a one-way mission," he said, his voice grave over the secure comms network. "A suicide mission, if you will. I'll need a crew brave enough to fly into the Maw and deliver that quantum disruption device." There was a long pause. Then, without hesitation, the crew was chosen. A team of the finest pilots, engineers, and scientists. The mission was clear: get inside the Maw, deploy the device, and pray it works. The crew of the Indomitable, a newly constructed experimental ship, began their final preparations. The ship was equipped with experimental shields and reinforced armor, but they knew it would never be enough. The Maw's gravity would tear them apart long before they reached its heart. "Do we have a chance?" asked Captain Leah John, the mission's leader, as she addressed her team. "No," replied Dr. Sharp, standing before them, her expression unwavering. "But if you succeed, the Maw will be no more." With grim determination, the crew of the Indomitable boarded their vessel. Humanity's last hope rested on their shoulders. There was no turning back. If they didn't succeed, Earth would fall. If they did, they would become the greatest heroes history had ever known. As the Indomitable began its descent toward the maw, the rest of humanity waited. They had already endured so much, but this was the last stand. Earth's survival depended on the impossible. The Indomitable shuddered as it blasted away from Earth's atmosphere, its engines roaring with power. A trail of fire followed the ship as it broke free of gravity's pull, but there was no celebration, no cheers, just the grim reality that the crew of this vessel had one purpose: to do what no one else could. Their mission was simple: fly into the heart of the maw, deploy the quantum disruption device, and pray they weren't torn apart before they did. Captain Leah Jong stood at the helm, her fingers gripping the controls with white-knuckled intensity. The ship's interior hummed with activity as engineers, physicists, and soldiers alike went over their final checks. Everyone on board understood the mission's stakes, and none of them had any illusions about their chances of survival. Their task was to get close enough to the maw to deploy the device, but no one could guess what would happen once they got there. The ship's massive exterior shimmered with a protective layer of energy shields designed to withstand extreme gravitational forces, but even that wasn't enough to fully protect them. The maw's gravitational field was vast, inescapable, and incredibly powerful. Just getting close enough to deploy the quantum device would mean fighting against the pull of the maw, enduring forces that would tear most ships apart. Inside the Indomitable, Dr. Evelyn Sharp watched the team's preparations with a cold sense of inevitability. This was her plan, the last hope for humanity. She had designed the quantum disruption device, a compact and volatile device capable of creating a pulse strong enough to destabilize the maw at a subatomic level. But the technology was experimental, untested. No one knew if it would work. No one knew if it would even survive the journey. "We've got a few minutes until we hit the maw's outer gravity," Captain Jung said, her voice calm despite the chaos around them. "Everyone, check your systems one last time. This is it." There was a moment of silence as the crew went over their checks. Their final moments. There were no words of encouragement. None needed. Everyone knew the truth. They weren't coming back. They had volunteered for this mission, knowing that their sacrifice would be the only chance Earth had to survive. Dr. Sharp's voice crackled over the comms, her tone steady. "Captain Jung, I'll be ready at the launch station for the device. I'll activate the quantum pulse as soon as you reach the maw's core." Jung nodded. "We'll get you close. You get that device to the right place." The ship trembled as they neared the maw's gravitational threshold. Space around them began to warp, distorting light and matter. The maw's presence was overwhelming. An infinite abyss, consuming everything it touched. The Indomitable fought against it, but every inch closer was a battle, every pulse of the engines a desperate push to maintain course. "We're going to hit it in 10 seconds, Jung said, gripping the controls tighter. "Get ready." On the command deck, the crew braced themselves for what came next. They could see it now, looming ahead. The maw's massive, writhing form, an unholy entity of swirling shadows and endless hunger. It was everything they had feared and more. There was no time left for second thoughts, only action. The ship lurched as the gravity of the maw took hold, and alarms blared. "We're being pulled in," an engineer shouted. The ship's thrusters fired in an attempt to break free, but it was no use. They were being sucked in, pulled toward the maw's insatiable center. "Now," Jung shouted. Dr. Sharp hit the button on the device, and the quantum pulse began to hum to life. The device, a small glowing orb, was carefully placed in the ship's center. With a deep breath, Sharp activated the final phase of the process. The pulse surged out from the device, spreading through the ship in a brilliant burst of light. She didn't know if it would reach the core of the maw, but there was nothing left to do now but hope. The Indomitable began to shake violently, the ship unable to withstand the gravitational pull any longer. Captain Zhang and the rest of the crew stared at the growing abyss in front of them, knowing that this was it, their final act, their final stand for Earth. In the last moments, as the ship was torn apart by the Maw's immense gravity, a final transmission was sent. For every civilization that fell, we stand. For every world consumed, we endure. Humanity does not bow. Remember us. The transmission went dark. The Indomitable was lost. There was no debate, no doubt. Humanity's last hope had been extinguished in the blink of an eye. But deep within the Maw, something strange began to happen. As the quantum pulse activated, the very fabric of the Maw's existence seemed to ripple, like a fracture in the very reality it inhabited. For a moment, the Maw paused, as though it too had felt the disturbance. Back on Earth, the world held its breath. The collective gaze of billions was fixed on the sky, eyes locked on the immense void that threatened to consume everything. For days, there had been no word from the Indomitable. The final transmission, a desperate plea from Captain Zhang and her crew, was the last echo of a fight that had seemed impossible from the start. And yet, despite the overwhelming odds, despite the loss, something felt different now. In military command centers, officers stared at their screens in disbelief. There was no way to explain it, not immediately. The Maw, which had been devouring the very core of the solar system, seemed to hesitate. Its swirling form shuddered. The gravitational field, which had once been an inescapable force, seemed to loosen just a little. The destruction slowed, and a brief flicker of hope spread across the globe. Is it stopping? Someone whispered in one of the command rooms. The question hung in the air, a fragile possibility no one dared voice aloud. Could it be that the pulse had worked? Dr. Evelyn Sharp, watching from her lab with a heart pounding in her chest, saw the readings. The Maw's destabilization was happening, but it wasn't just the Maw that was changing. The anomaly at the center, that unfathomable singularity that had powered its destructive power, was becoming unstable. It was imploding, but the process was slow, methodical, like the Maw itself was fighting to hold on to its grip on the galaxy. On the edge of the solar system, humanity's remaining forces stood ready, their weapons primed. General Tobias Wren, who had coordinated Earth's last-ditch resistance, stared at the tactical display. "I don't believe it," he muttered under his breath. "We might actually have a chance." Across the world, people waited, some praying, others silent, each holding their breath as the Maw's power seemed to falter. The Maw was the most dangerous entity known to the galaxy, an ancient force that devoured everything in its path. And yet now, for the first time, humanity had found a way to fight back. But it wasn't just the weaponry or the technological ingenuity that had given humanity this chance. It was something deeper, something more profound. The resolve of humanity, the refusal to surrender, even in the face of certain death, was something the Maw had never encountered. The Maw, which had once fed on the hopelessness of countless civilizations, had never faced an enemy that could outlast it. Humanity had done the impossible. It had resisted. For hours, nothing happened. The Maw hovered, a dark mass in the cold of space. And then, with a sudden burst of light, it exploded. At first, it seemed like just another trick of the mind. Light flickering, twisting, as if reality itself was shattering. But the light grew, expanding exponentially, as the quantum pulse that Dr. Sharp had designed took hold. The Maw's very structure buckled under the strain of the disruption, its immense gravitational pull collapsing inward as it was torn apart from the inside. The void that had once been so complete began to dissolve, unraveling piece by piece. The Maw, that unstoppable force, began to fade, its power finally drained. The shockwave of its destruction rippled through space, and for the first time in days, Earth's skies cleared. The gravitational pull that had once threatened to swallow the planet completely released. The storm that had loomed over humanity's head had passed. But there was no celebration, no cheers. Not yet. The cost had been great. The price of survival had been steep. The crew of the Indomitable was gone, their sacrifice engraved in every corner of Earth's history. Humanity had won, but at a cost no one would forget. The Galactic Council watched from afar, stunned. They had declared humanity lost, a footnote in the galaxy's history. They had underestimated the one thing the Maw had never accounted for: the strength of the human spirit. As Earth began its long road to recovery, one fact was undeniable. Humanity had survived. The Maw was gone. The void that had once threatened to swallow the solar system now lay silent, the darkness dissipating into the cold expanse of space. The shockwave of its destruction had sent ripples through the galaxy, a brief but powerful wave of energy that disrupted nearby star systems. But for the first time in weeks, Earth was at peace. The skies above the planet were clear. The atmosphere, once thick with the weight of impending doom, now felt lighter. But there was no celebration, only mourning. Humanity had won, yes, but the price had been unimaginable. The crew of the Indomitable, the brave souls who had made the ultimate sacrifice, had given their lives for a chance at survival. Their names would be remembered, etched into the history of every nation, every continent, every heart on Earth. Their selflessness was now the symbol of humanity's resilience, but it came at the cost of lives that could never be replaced. In the aftermath of the battle, the world was left to pick up the pieces. Nations that had once been divided, at war with each other, now stood together in the face of the unimaginable. The surviving leaders, military commanders, and scientists convened in a historic summit. The global conference was broadcast to every corner of Earth, and for the first time, people saw the power of unity, the strength of humanity working as one. President Elias Carter stood at the podium, his voice steady but heavy with grief. "We have faced the impossible and emerged victorious. But let us not forget the sacrifices that made this moment possible. The crew of the Indomitable gave their lives so that we could have a future. They are heroes, every one of them, and it is because of them that we now stand here today." Tears streamed down the faces of many who had witnessed the destruction and loss, but there was no regret in their hearts. There was only the understanding that the fight had been worth it. Earth had survived. Meanwhile, the scientists and engineers who had worked tirelessly to develop the quantum disruption device began analyzing the Maw's remains. Pieces of the Maw structure, once thought indestructible, now lay scattered across the cosmos, slowly disintegrating. The energy that had once fueled its existence had dissipated, leaving behind nothing but fragments of a once unstoppable force. Dr. Evelyn Sharp, who had been at the heart of the operation, could hardly bring herself to look at the data. She had succeeded in her mission, but the cost was too high. The loss of the Indomitable crew weighed on her every thought. "We did what we had to do," she whispered to herself, "but I'll never forget them. None of us will." Despite the crushing loss, Earth was beginning to rebuild. The global economy, once on the brink of collapse, slowly began to stabilize. The military forces, though battle-worn, were strengthened by the unity forged in the flames of the conflict. Nations that had been enemies were now allies, and the human spirit, tested by the ultimate trial, emerged stronger than ever. The stars above, once a symbol of humanity's isolation, now felt within reach. No longer would Earth be just another world in the galaxy. The Maw had shown them the harsh reality of existence, a universe filled with dangers beyond their comprehension. But it had also shown them something else: the strength of the human will to survive. The Galactic Council, watching from their distant, indifferent perspective, could hardly comprehend what had just transpired. They had deemed Earth insignificant, a fleeting civilization on the brink of extinction. Yet humanity had not only withstood the apocalypse, it had defied the galaxy's expectations. The Council's stance on Earth would never be the same again. Across the world, monuments to the fallen were erected in honor of the Indomitable crew. Statues, plaques, and memorials bearing their names stood as a testament to the indomitable spirit of humanity. People came together, not just to mourn, but to celebrate the very essence of what it meant to be human, resilient, defiant, and unyielding. And as Earth's citizens gazed up at the stars, they knew one thing for certain. Humanity had proven it could face any challenge, no matter how great, and emerge victorious. They would never forget the Maw, but they would always remember that they had won. Months had passed since the destruction of the Maw, but the weight of its consequences still hung heavy in the air. Earth had emerged from the brink of annihilation, but the scars of the battle would never fade. The people who had stood together during those darkest days would carry the memories of that fight into the future, a future that was now full of possibility and uncertainty. The global recovery effort was nothing short of miraculous. Cities that had been devastated by the global panic and chaos of the last days were slowly being rebuilt. Infrastructure that had once been on the verge of collapse was now being restored, powered by the ingenuity and drive that humanity had shown during the crisis. Technology once used for destruction was now being repurposed to rebuild the world. The quantum research and energy-based weapons developed for the Maw fight were now being used to advance humanity's scientific frontiers. The knowledge gained from that impossible battle had opened doors to a future that was more promising than anyone had imagined. But the question remained, what now? The galaxy, once a distant and largely unknown realm, now loomed large on humanity's horizon. The Maw was gone, but the void it left behind revealed just how fragile their position truly was. Earth was no longer the solitary, insignificant planet it had once been. Humanity had proven its ability to survive, but could they continue to thrive in a universe that had shown them only its most terrifying side? The United Nations convened for an extraordinary summit, this time with a new sense of urgency. Representatives from every nation sat side by side, the lessons of the past fresh in their minds. It was time to look beyond Earth and prepare for the next stage of humanity's survival. For too long, Earth had existed in isolation, unaware of the cosmic forces that could tear it apart. Now, the world had to work together to build a future that was not just about survival, but exploration and expansion. General Tobias Wren, who had led the resistance during the battle with the Maw, addressed the summit. "We stand here today because we refuse to give up. We fought the impossible and won. But that victory was not just about defeating the Maw. It was about proving that humanity is more than a footnote in the galaxy. We have the strength, the courage, and the will to shape our own destiny. And now, it's time to act." Wren's words resonated deeply with the delegates. They knew that Earth could never go back to how it was before. The attack by the Maw had shown humanity's vulnerabilities, but it had also awakened a fire within them. No longer would they stand idly by while the universe marched on. It was time to make their mark. With the help of the scientific community, the newly unified Earth governments began to build an interstellar fleet. The resources gathered from the Maw's remnants, as well as the knowledge gleaned from the quantum disruption device, would form the foundation of this new endeavor. Humanity's future was no longer limited to the confines of their home planet. They now had the means to explore the stars, to engage with alien civilizations, and to secure their place in the galactic order. But it wasn't just about technology. It was about humanity's will. The Maw had underestimated their determination, their ability to come together and push beyond the impossible. And now, the galaxy would witness the next chapter of humanity's story, not as a fragile, insignificant race, but as one that had already defied the odds and survived a cataclysm that would have crushed others. On the eve of the launch of humanity's first deep space exploration vessel, President Elias Carter addressed the world once more. "We have proven that we are capable of more than mere survival. We have proven that no matter the odds, we will stand strong. The Maw is gone, but its destruction has paved the way for a new era of humanity. We are no longer bound to Earth. We are part of the galaxy. And we will meet the future with open arms, ready to explore, to learn, and to grow." The spacecraft Astra, humanity's first true exploration vessel, was prepared for its maiden voyage. It was a symbol of all they had overcome and a beacon of hope for what lay ahead. As the countdown began, the people of Earth gathered in front of screens, watching together as the ship lifted off, breaking free of Earth's atmosphere, its path set for the stars. As the Astra sailed into the unknown, humanity stood united. They had survived the impossible. They had defeated the greatest threat the universe had ever known. And now, they were ready to embark on a new journey, one that would stretch beyond their home planet, into the very heart of the cosmos itself. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: humanity had arrived. The galaxy would never be the same again.